Do the Jews have the right to Israel, or did they take the right away from themselves?
The Jews always point to their wonderful 3,000-year history and the fact that God gave them the land. Let's now take a closer look at these two aspects. If we look at the last 3,000 years of Israel's history, we will find that the Jews lived there in freedom for only about 500 years, 2 green bars on the left, while they spent the rest of their history in bondage, all remaining bars in red. That alone should tell us a lot about the DNA of the Jews. Finally, if we look more closely at the history of Israel over the last 3,000 years, specifically from the death of King Solomon to the time of Israel's founding, we will find that during those 3,000 years, the Jews have barely spent a single day in freedom in this land. Based on this fact, any person with common sense would tell you that shortly after the Exodus, the Jews simply did not fit in this region. But what about God? Didn't God promise them this land? Yes, but life in this land came with conditions. Conditions at which the Jews failed miserably because they almost never fulfilled them. And so they had to bear these consequences. These conditions and consequences are described in detail in Deuteronomy 28:15-68, taking up several pages of the Bible. Obviously, the Jews continue to suffer the consequences of this failure to this day. It seems as if very few of us have ever read these exact passages in the Bible. Instead, we mistakenly and unthinkingly gave in to their endless mantra about the God who gave them the land, forgetting that this grant was subject to these conditions. So let's return to the development of the state of Israel from the year 1200 BC to the year 1947. After the death of King Solomon, second bar on the left, the people of Israel were so emaciated and exhausted from building the temple that they begged Solomon's son, Rehoboam, for a relaxation of the tax burden. Instead of giving in, Solomon's son replied, "My father punished you with whips, but I will punish you with scorpions." From that point on, the 10 northern tribes of Israel separated from the 2 remaining tribes and never got back together again for the next 3,000 years. Since God is just, and the Jews continued to disobey him, the consequences of their actions were soon followed by the occupation by the Assyrians, after them the Babylonians, then Alexander the Great, then the Hasmoneans, then the Romans, then the Byzantines, then the Arabs, then the Crusaders, then the Mamelukes, then the Turks, and finally the English. And so we see the result of the disregard of the laws of the Old Testament on this chart. In the year 70, and especially in the year 135 AD, the Jews were so decimated by the Romans that there were hardly any surviving Jews left in the territory of Israel. Judaism became, in effect, an empty shell. And yet there were people who recognized a certain value in this religion. For now, we are only interested in the few who survived. Some of them went to Spain to finally write down their oral traditions which Jesus Christ had warned them against so many times. These traditions mostly consisted of the thoughts and ideas of Babylonian concepts. And so, around the year 300 AD, their Jewish religion finally came into being, finally written down in their Babylonian Talmud. While the Jews retained the 5 books of Moses, their central key work from then on became this Babylonian Talmud, supplemented by the Kabbalah and the Zohar. This was the big bang of the separation of the Jewish religion from the Christian religion. Despite the shared Old Testament, from then on, the Jewish religion separated from the Christian religion and remained diametrically opposed to it to this day. From that day on, Judeo-Christianity became an oxymoron. Now to the second chart. It's a different representation of the same events. Of particular interest to us, however, is the small green bar to the left of 0. Since we previously looked at the history of Israel from about 1200 BC to 1947, we now consider the history of Israel from 1947 to the present day. In this context, it's interesting to note that in 1920, just before the great hype regarding the exodus of the Jews to Palestine, only about 50,000 Jews lived there. How did this number rise to 7.2 million within such a short period of time? Quite simply, the largest portion of this increase is attributable to the Eastern Jews, also called the Ashkenazi Jews. They originally came from Khazaria, a land that was located between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea around the 8th century. They were a Turco-Mongolian people. As you can see, they were a vast nation that was later able to replenish the dwindling ranks of the remaining Jews by the millions, even though they had absolutely nothing in common with the original Jews. The Khazars were originally phallus worshippers, and their main occupation, among other things, was to recruit as mercenaries to the surrounding countries. When the Khazars increasingly came under pressure from the Christian Russians in the north and the Muslims in the south because of their behavior, The Khazar king thought it would be a good idea to change the Khazar religion as well, just as the Russians in the north and the Muslims in the south had already done. So the king also sought a new religion for himself and his people. Since the religion of his two enemies in the north and south was already taken, the Jewish religion, which was still relatively unpopular at that time, offered him a suitable alternative. When he finally read in the Babylonian Talmud that Jesus was, among other things, a sorcerer, and that he was burning in his own hot excrement in hell for eternity, and that his mother was a prostitute, the king realized that this religion would probably be the best choice for him and his people as a counterpart to the Christian religion he hated so much. And when the Russians finally expelled the Khazars from Russia in 996 because of their intolerable behavior, the animosity between the Russians and these Babylonian Jews that continues to this day was born. These Jews went to Eastern Europe, mainly to Poland, but also to Germany, Austria, and then further to Western Europe, and finally to America, where they continue to control the destiny of the USA to this day. Looking at these charts today, we see that nothing has changed in the DNA of this from today's perspective, mixed people united only by their belief in the Babylonian Talmud. And if we also consider this small green section to the left of the zero, it shows us the hour zero of Israel's founding on the one hand, but on the other hand, it also conceals wars that, due to the imbalance of this founding, continue to this day. Between the year 1947 and 1949, we had the First Palestine War, then the so-called Suez Crisis of 1956, then the Six-Day War of 1967, then the War of Attrition from 1967 to 1970, then the Yom Kippur War of 1973, then Operation Litani of 1978, then the First Lebanon War from 1982 to 1985, then the First Intifada from 1987 to 1993, then the Second Intifada from 2000 to 2005, then the Second Lebanon War from 2006, then Operation Cast Lead from 2008 to 2009, then Operation Pillar of Cloud of 2012, then Operation Protective Edge of 2014, then Operation Guardian of the Walls in 2021, and finally the ongoing genocide of Palestine, as well as the recent attack on Iran. Today, we must ask ourselves whether Jews with such a history have a right to Israel. Just because a few guys met in Basel and decided to buy a country. Is Theodor Herzl God? Did the Italians meet in Basel and claim they now have a right to the cities of Lyon, Cologne, Trier, Mainz, Regensburg, Zurich, London, or Istanbul simply because they once founded them and lived in them? And to make all legal, two shady individuals signed a deal they called the Balfour Declaration, which was so irresponsible and ill-conceived that it resulted in a never-ending genocide. Are Lord Balfour and Lord Rothschild equivalent to Moses and God? And if the Rothschilds are such do-gooders, why do they allow themselves to be photographed under the picture titled "Satan Summons His Legions" alongside the Satanist Abramović? I think everyone has to answer this question for themselves. When playing musical chairs, which is by the way called Journey to Jerusalem in German, any child will tell you that it's impossible for two people to sit on the same chair at the same time. I'm not an arbiter in this regard. I simply wanted to point out facts that exist and that are being covered up and denied in certain circles. But these facts exist whether they want them to exist or not, because the good thing about the truth is that it remains the truth, regardless of what you think about it. Because in the end, we will have to face the truth whether we like it or not. And then the truth will set us free, whether we want it or not.